What's up, investors? It's the Russian Dude. Welcome to another episode of Thank God It's Monday podcast. Today we have another guest, Jason J. Smart. A lot of you guys requested him in the comments. I made a post earlier a couple of weeks ago. So welcome, Jason. And I guess a lot of people see you for the very first time because you had an explosive growth for the last month. So yeah, a lot of people will be discovering you in the near future. So enjoy the benefits. And first of all, thanks so much for accepting the invitation to be the guest on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So yeah, once again, since you are a rising star of Russian-Ukrainian YouTube, I would say a lot of people do not know about you yet. So if you want, please introduce yourself, tell us a couple of words about what you do here on YouTube, the type of videos that you make and things like this.
So you're correct. It was just in the middle of May that I started making YouTube videos, and the channel gained about 130,000 subscribers in the course of about 4 weeks and a half. So I attribute that not really to my own self, though. It's simply, I think that there's very strong public support for Ukraine. If people are interested to understand more what's occurring within Russia itself, my own background is I study Russia and the Putin regime. I was thrown out of Russia in 2010. I was also banned from Belarus, and I was banned also from Uzbekistan, where I was arrested and deported. But I specifically have been working with the Russian opposition for all those years. At present, I live in Kiev usually, and I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post. But I specifically look at the Putin regime. So my undergraduate, as well as my master's, my PhD, the dissertations all had to deal with the Putin regime specifically in its foreign policy and how it operates. In the case of the master's degree, it was in Central Asia. Then it was actually more about bilateral with the West, especially the United States, for the PhD. But either way, most of my focus has been on them and what that all means. So I try to interpret what's going on within Russia and what the actual significance is, whether it's the Russian economy collapsing or if it's the risk of coups or overthrows of the government, how that all operates together to form the decisions of the Kremlin.
Gotcha. Perfect. Very concise summary. Thanks so much. So guys, now you can see. You mentioned you've been thrown out, even banned from Belarus, Uzbekistan. You were thrown out of Russia. And I did see in the description of your channel that you're literally like blacklisted by the Kremlin. Is that true? Like what happened? How did they even find out about you? Like, can you tell this story?
Sure. So when I was back in 2009, I just started a job with the International Republican Institute, which was financed by USAID as well as the National Endowment for Democracy. Now, the IRI, like the National Endowment for Democracy itself, was founded by Ronald Reagan to promote democracy in countries that were developing or, at that point, still behind the Iron Curtain. So I began working with various opposition leaders in Russia. That included back then people like Boris Nemtsov, Garry Kasparov, with whom I still collaborate, and others. So Russia sent me a letter in 2010 in January notifying me that I was considered to be ineligible for visa because I was considered to be a risk to national security. So I have that letter still. It's still framed on the wall in my office. And since then, I've been working against the Putin regime. So it's been a long time now.
So just like this, you will never get visas back to Russia ever again, I'm assuming, like unless until the regime changes or something like this, I'm assuming, right?
I don't think it would be a good idea, even if I could get a visa, to return to Russia anytime soon.
So you're not planning to come back to Russia ever, or maybe when the regime hopefully changes within our lifetimes, or that's it, this country is completely blacklisted for you?
I don't think I'll ever go back to Russia, and that's okay.
Oh, fair enough. No questions here, fair enough. I'm assuming we all know where it comes from. So a little bit, maybe it feel a random question, but I just sometimes like to, shake up things so randomly. So originally, coming back to the original thing I mentioned, that your channel literally exploded, literally like in middle of May, if I'm not mistaken, May 11 was your video, like 800,000 views, up from like 200, 300. What do you think changed? Like what kind of video you made? What kind of topic maybe you spoke about that made so significant increase in the interest of your persona right here on this platform? What do you think changed?
Well, as I said, I don't think it's attributable to me. I just simply analyze what's going on within Russia. I think there's very few people who are career criminologists who are still active, who are giving analysis to what's currently going on and what it means. And the fact is I have lived in Kiev since about 2015. Formerly, I lived in Central Asia for 4 years, and I was living in Moldova for 3 years. And I lived in Russia for more than a year as a national security scholar. But I think that sort of background is sort of unique with Americans. Obviously, I speak Russian and other regional languages, but I am able to read the news, follow the news, see what's going on. and to give that analysis to people. And I think there's strong interest. I mean, there's a lot of people who talk about Ukraine. I like to talk about Ukraine too, but I know there's a lot of people who are already doing that, are doing a great job, especially Ukrainian nationals. And so I think that where I could provide more public benefit, I hope, is to understand better authoritarian regimes, such as the Russian one, and its alliances with other countries, such as Iran, such as China, such as North Korea, and what this means, and why it is that they work with, for instance, non-state actors, which people often don't think about, including things like Hamas, Hezbollah, the drug cartels. They operate in collusion. And so I think that's sort of fascinating. I think that people don't usually think of the Putin regime in the global perspective as to what it really means and how significant it really is, what it does. So if we understand this better, I think it's ultimately beneficial to Ukraine, because people understand that it's not just an isolated incident. It's not just two countries at war. It's part of a global war. In the eyes of Vladimir Putin, we're already in World War IV. And what I mean by that is I think that he perceives the Cold War as having been in World War III. And it was a global war. It was across Africa, Latin America, Asia. But now today, there's another war, and it started. The Soviet Union lost, obviously, the Cold War. Today, it's a different era, and he believes that he is fighting in a global war. And that's what we see with what's going on with, for instance, if we look at Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, which are African governments are overthrown with the backing of Wagner Group and the other Russian entities. Or if we look at the Maduro regime or the Nicaraguan regimes, they operate today with this strong backing of Moscow, which is critical for them to be able to continue. So if we understand that Russia's perspective on the global stage is something that poses a direct threat to Western national security, I think it changes why people would understand the importance of supporting Ukraine now.
Okay, so I can definitely hear that you are pretty pro-Ukrainian, like very heavily leaning towards pro-Ukraine, to say the least. So what do you think then about just regular Russian people? Do they still have hope to be seen as good people in the eyes of the world? Do regular Russians still have this chance to, I don't know, resurrect as good people in front of other people?
I mean, as I mentioned, I continue to collaborate with the Russian opposition. And so I agree. I mean, I know very well, as I say, Kasparov, I've worked with for many years, but you go through Khodorkovsky, I've known him for many years as well. I have breakfast every time that we're in the same city together, or any of these other guys. So I think that ultimately it depends on the person, what he decides to do. In Kiev, I'm friends with Ilya Pomarov. I've known Ilya for 15 years. I stayed at his house before. I lived at his house before. So I know all these people very, very well for more than a decade and a half, in many cases, 2 decades.
Okay, perfect. So yes, there is hope, as you can see, guys. Just don't treat person like he's Russian, so he must be a bad person. Always be open-minded. So thank you for being open-minded, I would say, Jason. So then you did mention previously, obviously, you're obviously not just doing Russian-Ukrainian relationship, other countries, so you have PhD. I also want to ask, what do you think relationship of Putin and Trump, where it is going? Because originally it kind of started, they're going to be best buddies, they're going to figure out something, and then as you can see now, pretty much nothing happened. We're back to status quo, nothing is changing. Where do you think their relationship is going?
That's a good question. I think that ultimately, obviously, I think that Donald Trump believed that he had some sort of unique insight into how Putin worked and that Putin respected him. It's quite clear that Putin doesn't respect him, doesn't take him very seriously. And I think it's sort of surprising, but Donald Trump is himself surprised by that. I don't know why he assumed that he was so much higher or better, but obviously Putin doesn't really care about him and is continuing to just play with him. So over time, I think not necessarily because Donald Trump will have a change of heart, but because simply there'll be too much public pressure. It's a good thing. It'll force him to sort of clarify his position. Look at the number, and my site is an example, the number of the Republican senators who have been saying that they wish to pass the new sanctions bill, which already has 84 co-sponsors. When you look at those senators, and they say that, Putin has decided to be disrespectful of Donald Trump, and it's time that we put him in his place. And I think that sort of psyche or logic might appeal to other Republicans or even appeal to people in Donald Trump's circle. But at least that's the hope. Obviously, though, Donald Trump is very committed to the idea that Vladimir Putin is a rational actor with whom he should do business. But I think that it's probably quite erroneous of a belief.
Yes, to be honest, I do agree on most things, especially that once again, that Trump thought at first it's a person to be dealing business with, and then Putin just realized that just a person to humiliate, to make fun of, to just spin around, to just show that Russia may be still dominant, quote unquote, over the US, that the US doesn't have maybe that strong of a leader. So yeah, I kind of, maybe I would say, predicted it myself that this is probably where it is going to go. Even before the elections, the result was official back in, I don't know, like 1 year ago exactly, summer of 2024. And I also did think that probably if Trump will not be able to kind of solve the things quickly, he will just lose interest, and then he'll be just like, okay, guys, whatever, you just fight on your own. I maybe have some Pentagon, some, I don't know, FBI or whatever, doesn't matter. They will try to take over this problem. I'm out of here, you guys on your own. And I guess that's kind of pretty much where it is heading. So yeah, I'm on your side in this case, I would say. Another thing, then also you did mention also Iran, which is one of the most recent news that Iran, Israel will know what's happening, obviously. Everyone also thought that Russia, Iran are pretty good friends. And then when there is a confrontation and Putin is completely like, there must be a communication between the two countries. We don't want to escalate things. You guys on your own. What do you think happened here? Like, isn't Iran feeling betrayed that maybe it was expecting Russia will do something, at least something, and then Putin just is cold feet, has such a sudden, unexpected cold feet towards Iran? What do you think about this situation, this quote-unquote betrayal?
So I think it's multifold. So on one side, let's talk about initially the attacks on Israel. So from the perspective of Ukraine and what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, um, the attacks on Iran were positive because Iran, as you know, is supplying a lot of support to Russia, specifically with the Shahed drones, because a lot of the specific components, the electronics, including the motors, are produced within Iran and shipped to Russia. Russia does assemble them, but it's a misunderstanding that Russia is creating its own. It doesn't have the capacity to create a lot of specific components, and it's dependent on Iran. So this is positive. But what it means, I think, in the more global perspective to which you refer, which is, how does Putin view the situation? Well, certainly the Iranians had hoped that the Russians would do more. They've been asking for a long time now for weapons, and the Russians have not sent them. But they've also been asking for air defense. And it's funny is that the Russians simply cannot provide air defense at this point because within Russia, there's enough attacks with drones that it's not possible to just dispatch air defense to Iran. And so that's something I think that sort of surprised the Iranians as well. Now, Vladimir Putin did offer to step in to negotiate a peace between Iran and Israel. But I think it's very clear what his objective was he reached out first to Trump, interestingly enough. And I think his perspective was that, well, listen, if I get in now, I can say, listen, I can make a peace between these two countries, but I need you to sort of help me out with the situation in Ukraine and to negotiate an outcome there that's more favorable to my interest. I have no doubt that's what his objective was. Because historically, that's the way that Russia works. It acts as the negotiator in things where it has an interest. That's what we saw historically in the case of Iran when they got involved in the nuclear deal back in 2015. The objective of Russia back then was to get its hands all over the materials that were being used and to have a direct role. It offered, for instance, to enrich uranium back to Russia. Why was it doing this? It was because it wanted to have control over it and be a central role in the process. But second to that, Russia understands very well that if it's a negotiator, that means that it's always going to have a role in the region. It'll always have some sort of a larger necessity that countries such as the United States involve it. Because the U.S. doesn't have any relation with Iran. European countries mostly don't have great relations with Iran. So it's going to be very difficult for there to be another negotiator. But Russia then has unique access. And that's why Israeli-Russian relations are also sort of interesting, is that Israel is not a country who has been overwhelmingly supporting Ukraine and sending assistance. And the reason was they were always very careful to maintain their own diplomatic relations with Russia, because Russia, at least when the war started, keep in mind, was helping with Syria as an example. Now Assad has fallen, obviously. But, Russia did play a role with that relationship and managing the relationship for other countries in the region.
Do you think then the same fate may be whatever is happening right now with Iran, that Russia kind of abandoned them? Do you think the same fate might happen to other allies, quote unquote, of Putin, for example, North Korea, in case there is some kind of an escalation? Do you think Putin will also abandon Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think that Russia has historically shown that it's which is normal for a country, by the way, but it's very transactional in its relationships. But in the case of Iran specifically, if we wish to speak about that, keep in mind, as you know very well, the Russians and Iranians, or the Persians, have had 5 different wars over the centuries. They fought over the Caucasus. They fought over what is today Azerbaijan and Armenia. They also had to fight over Georgia, the country, because it's a Christian country, and the Russians wished to liberate it back centuries ago. And then we have also during these different periods, these different conflicts, different fighting, they never had great relations. It was only about 1979 when it started to get better again after they overthrew the Shah and they had the Islamic Revolution. The Soviet Union saw that there was obviously an opportunity to do business because very few other countries were willing to. And they got very involved in a lot of different industry within Iran, such as building the electric grid, building energy supplies, etc. So they had a very active role in Iran. So that's something that I think today is what Russia sees as a window of opportunity. Not a lot of people want to deal with Iran, and they can be the middleman. But we see other countries do that. Look at the case of North Korea and how the Chinese use that for their own uses as well. I think that the Russians also understand that North Korea is a country that provides some limited benefits. Presently, it's supplying a significant number of artillery shells to Russia, as well as supplying uh, uh, rockets and missiles. But overall, I think that they don't really view North Korea as a country that there's not a lot you can get out of North Korea. I mean, it's not exactly known for a lot of trade. It's very limited. So I don't think that they really would care what happens to North Korea if it tomorrow had to change. Would they be willing to send Russian troops to save the Kim regime? No, absolutely not.
Like, yeah, North Korea, we can maybe in some way call it kind of newer friend of Putin, but also obviously there are other friends of Putin, allies of Putin. For example, post-Soviet countries like Belarus and other countries like Hungary, Serbia. What do you think then about those allies who think that that's it? Putin, Russia is pretty much their own Slavic world. And then when they see how Putin treats, I don't know, once again, North Korea and other allies, do you think those then countries will wait until it's their moment to try and ask Putin for help, and then inevitably receive like no or a deny from Putin saying, sorry guys, you're on your own? Do you think if Putin keeps betraying his allies, do you think he's more long-lasting partners and alliances, do they think they will fall apart before something even happens to them? Like, will there be like a domino effect in the so-called alliances of Putin?
Well, I think that, per the Vucic, who is the leader of Serbia, their relationship's sort of tense at the moment because the Serbs aren't willing to help out with things like armaments and things that were Soviet made that the Russians would like to have access to. But I think if we look at more strategic or more important partners for Russia, like China, that's always the one that people talk about because that is the most important one, obviously. Russia is highly dependent. A significant part of Russia's total trade globally is with China. But ultimately, I think that China also really is not going to do anything, not put itself at risk for Russia. Keep in mind, Chinese trade globally, only less than 2% of it's done with Russia, but about 15% is done with the United States. If you look at the US and its allies, not just in Europe, but also in Asia, and you were to mount them all together and sum them, it's more than 60% of Chinese external trade is with the US and its friends, less than 2% with Russia. So if push comes to shove, I don't think the Chinese are going to wreck their economy, which is already suffering. Youth unemployment rate's extremely high right now in China. It's gone down in the past year, but it's still about 18%. So China's got enough significant internal problems, domestic problems, that I don't think that they're going to be willing to disturb their economy further to help Russia. They just don't gain anything from it. I mean, they buy cheap oil from Russia, but they're also not doing it as friends. They're getting steep discounts on the oil. And they are, as I said, they are getting something directly material benefit from this. That is, they're buying cheap oil. They're not doing it just to help Russia. This is not solidarity between countries. This is materialistic.
Well, yeah. So materialistic 100%. I can agree with this. Pretty much that is the only thing that's like Russia is just looking for these countries potentially as one of the biggest one of the biggest advantages maybe of having those allies is just to have someone to buy their oil to fund the war machine. So yeah, I can see where you're going with this one. So in this then case, long-term war, long-term confrontation, long-term war between Russia and Ukraine, who do you think will suffer more? Do you think the West will get tired of supporting Ukraine or will just continue supporting just enough? Do you think Russia will just keep losing alliances, becoming more isolated, and then just one country on its own with the Iron Curtain back up once again? Let's say, so we're talking maybe 5, 10, 15 years. Which country do you think will suffer more in the long term?
I think so. Listen, my hypothesis about the war in Ukraine, I'll start with that because it's also the projection of the future of Russia. My hypothesis has been that Russia would lose the war, and it would be for one of three reasons. There's always the military option, which means Ukraine is able to retake all of its territory, the 1991 borders, and that's just improbable because, let's be honest, there's 22 million people or so in free Ukraine, the non-occupied section. There's about 145 million people in Russia. It would just seem very improbable. Now, there's two other things, and I've argued for 3 years now that it's probably one of these two other things that will be the end of the war, which is significant economic chaos within Russia, or it would be due to political instability. So political instability could be something like Prigozhin, the Wagner group, when they tried to overthrow the government, they started headed towards Moscow. And what we saw there was really interesting, because the Russian military, the Russian National Guard, the Russian police, the Russian people did not try to stop him. Quite the opposite. The people in the streets met him, they brought him food, they brought wine. And more than that, we saw that there was silence in Moscow. Dmitry Medvedev said nothing. Kirill, the patriarch of the Orthodox Church, said nothing. Nobody said anything. Even Putin said nothing. Everybody disappeared. But the senior military leadership saw him coming to Rostov. They could have called an airstrike on him when he's 100 kilometers away, 200 kilometers away. Why didn't they? It's because they weren't sure if he would actually take power. That's why we had the videos of the senior Russian leadership in Rostov chatting with Prigozhin, saying, this isn't a great idea. You can get in trouble for this. And they're drinking coffee. So that's what a political change would look like. And that's happened historically in Russia. I mean, overthrowing governments is not unknown in Russian history, which is actually a high predictor of future overthrows of governments is that if your country has historically had them, you're more likely to have them again. But I digress. Back to the economy, which is, I think, the most interesting one right now. There's a plant in Stavropol, whose name escapes me right now, but the company Stavropol today announced in MSNBC, I saw the article, that it was going to have to go out of business. And why that's very important is that this specific company creates electronics for the Russian aircraft, the Sukhoi, the MiGs, and everything else. Well, they create the specific components that only that factory makes in Russia for that sort of high-level precision that is necessary for like aircraft. And they're going out of business. And why are they going out of business is that the government is typically paying them something like $33 per unit. The market price is $46 per unit, but the government demands a lower price because it says, listen, we're 100% of your contracts and we demand it for a lower price. But that's causing them to go bankrupt. But there's a second thing that's a very bad sign. The second thing that's a very bad sign is that that company has outstanding debts that the government owes them about $2 or $3 million. But why can't the government just pay off that debt? That shouldn't be a big deal, $2 or $3 million. If that's going to keep your industry going, you're going to lose electronics without it. You're going to lose the ability to make airplanes. But the Russian government can't do it. It can't figure out how to resolve this. So it's already having these sorts of liquidity problems. It's probably a very good sign that there's other grave problems within the general economy of Russia. So what does this mean for the future of Russia? I actually strongly do agree with Kasparov, Gary Kasparov, which is that eventually Russia losing in this war will be the best thing that's ever happened to Russia, because it'll reset the mindset. This has happened before in other countries. It wouldn't be the first time that a country has had imperialistic ambitions, and after losing a war, it had to relook the way that it existed and question whether that was the best way to go. But I don't think that Russia will ever have that realization unless it has a total collapse. That is, that it faces the total defeat in Russia. Everything in Crimea is reunited with Ukraine, so that they realize these imperial ambitions, this idea, it's absurd. It just has no basis. Listen, the country lost. Was it really worth it? What did it gain from this? Already it's had over 1 million casualties in 3 years. Keep in mind, within Russia itself, as you know well enough, there's 145 million people. There's about 40 million people, according to the government statistics, that don't have indoor plumbing. The country is losing incredible numbers of villages every year because people just move out. The population is rapid decline. It's got one of the worst demographic situations in the entire world. And the government has chosen to prioritize this war, which has gained them nothing. It's simply expensive and imperialistic, but it doesn't help Russia. At the end of the day, Russia does not gain anything. Nothing at all. So unfortunately, the Putin enterprise, which I think is just a criminal organization, has been fleecing its population, robbing its population now for 25 years. And the people are getting poorer and poorer. And unfortunately, they keep being told fairy tales that this is somehow in their interest. But ultimately, it's not. They live in abject poverty. I mean, the average, pension is $145 a month. It's incredible. It's simply incredible.
We do also talk a lot on my channel about the economics of Russia. I see where this is going, kinda. Like I can predict maybe in some way, like, or at least some assumptions I can make. They also pretty frequently match with other content creators here on YouTube. You did mention as well the same thing. I personally, at least think that Russian economy is right now on the war tracks. I guess that's the way you say it in English. Basically, yeah, like these huge sign-up bonuses, $40,000, $50,000, the monthly salaries of $2,000, $3,000. Just sign a paper right here, blah blah blah. Good luck, try to survive and trench, and then that's it. These are the people who used to be bus drivers making like what, $300, $400 per month salaries. When obviously all the industries are now shifting towards military production, drone production, drone assembly, things like this. Like people who are like women in Ivanovo, I think that's the place where a lot of tailors are. Where a lot of tailoring is made, basically. Now they're just sewing military camouflages, these military nets, once again making 10 times their salaries. Then, like, once again, what obviously is the inflation here. But what happens when the war stops? Those industries will no longer be required. Those industries will no longer be needed. Those people will not want to go back to their pre-war salaries, which are now, instead of $3,000, it's now $400 per month salaries. Nobody would want that. And then maybe, yes, this will also maybe in some way lead to regime change or some, at least, no, maybe not the regime change, even though I hope, but maybe to some obviously resistance protests from the people. People will go on the street, and maybe something once again like Wagner mutiny will happen. Somebody who we don't know about yet, or some well-known person, or maybe even from somebody from in Putin's inner circle. Because yes, like you mentioned, whenever Wagner was approaching Moscow, nobody tried to stop them. The only thing they did, they just destroyed the roads with tractors, and then it just stopped the local traffic from going back and forth to dachas and summer houses. That's pretty much the only thing that happened. Nobody was willing to risk their lives or even to be detained or anything like this for the sake of survival of the regime of Putin. So maybe once again, some members of Putin's inner circle, they do see it as well. They know that they have all the opportunities if they want to do something what Prigozhin did. They just need to move it until the end. They need to finish what they start. They don't just stop halfway, trusting the words of Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko that you're going to be safe, come to Belarus, we have a nice place for you. Well, we all know how it all happened, how it all ended for Evgeny Prigozhin, unfortunately for him. So yeah, long story short, definitely pretty much more and more content creators who I speak with here on YouTube, we pretty much share the same point of view. So hopefully, let's see, hopefully this is where it was all going. A lot of Russian regimes in the past were also changing because of, once again, mutinies and protests, people going on the streets, things like this. And history repeats itself. So let's see if it's going to happen this time as well. For this reason, unless you have something else you want to add, for this reason, I have a final question for you, the traditional question on this Thing at Monday podcast interview, which goes as following. If you are in front of Putin, what will you tell him?
Interesting. I think that if you're in front of Putin, it'd be less about saying and more about doing. And I think that Putin himself understands that his life is in risk. I think that he himself will die a very violent death, probably in the near term. And the reason I think that, though, and what I would tell him is exactly this, is that Russian history is pretty clear on this. I think that the Russian people uniting the streets is very improbable. But when you're going to overthrow a government, the way that you do it is you look at, will the population reject you or not? And at present, the Russian population would not reject it. We saw in the case of what happened with Prigozhin. There's a second thing, which is that Putin is 72 years old. His birthday on October 7th, he'll be 73. He's someday going to die. And if he's going to die at someday, you know that there's going to be factions fighting for power. And the factions all hate each other. The oligarchs all hate each other. And they're aligned with various units in the military, they're aligned with the private military companies, or they're aligned with the intelligence services. But when they start to fight for power, they're going to liquidate each other. And they're going to liquidate and take the assets from each other and kill off the families of each other. But if you know that Putin is just going to one day die, you'd be sort of stupid just to wait for that day to come. It'd be smarter to take the power into your own hands right now and to kill Putin yourself so you can guarantee that the transition would be to your people and not to one of the opposing peoples, because they will undoubtedly kill you and your family. So the wisest thing somebody could do within Russia right now, that's in the upper elites of the intelligence service and the military or of the oligarchy, is to kill Putin. And Putin's death would probably be the best thing that could happen to Russia.
Yep. Well, there you have it. Thanks so much, Jason, for appearing on Thank God It's Monday podcast. It was a pleasure. Very enjoyable interview. Very smart things were said. Very smart answers you provided. I know how to say, for some reason, lost for American words. I just recorded my own video. But yeah, long story short, thanks much for appearing. Thanks much for your time. Thank God It's Monday podcast. See you guys tomorrow.